It's 1700s Spain. A dying king lies motionless in his chamber, his body failing him in every way. His jaw, grotesquely malformed, makes chewing nearly impossible. His limbs, frail and useless, bear the weight of generations of inherited defects. This is Charles II of Spain, the last of the Habsburgs, a dynasty that finally collapsed under the weight of its own legacy. But this wasn't just a Habsburg curse. Time and time again, powerful families, Egyptian pharaohs, European monarchs, and even isolated aristocracies believed that marrying within their own ranks would secure power. Instead, it delivered sickness, deformity, and, in the end, ruin. So why did they keep doing it? What drove rulers to embrace a practice that sealed their own downfall? And just how horrific were the consequences? Stay with us as we unravel some of history's most disturbing tales of royal inbreeding and the terrifying fate of those who lived with its consequences. For centuries, the House of Habsburg ruled over vast empires, stretching from Austria and Spain to the Holy Roman Empire. But beneath their immense power lay a fatal flaw: an obsession with keeping their bloodline pure. To maintain control, Habsburg monarchs routinely married within their own family, often uniting with nieces or first cousins. While this practice ensured that power remained in their hands, it came at a devastating cost: widespread genetic disorders, severe deformities, and alarmingly high infant mortality rates. The most infamous result of Habsburg inbreeding was their distinctive Habsburg jaw, a severely protruding lower jaw that, in extreme cases, made eating and speaking nearly impossible. Alongside this came the Habsburg lip, an exaggerated lower lip that left their mouths permanently slack. Their Habsburg nose was marked by a lumpy, overhanging tip, making their features instantly recognizable across centuries of royal portraits. The consequences of centuries of interbreeding were most visible in Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. Born in 1661, Charles was the only surviving son of King Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria, who were uncle and niece. From infancy, it was clear that something was terribly wrong. He didn't speak until he was 4. He couldn't walk until he was 8. As other children grew stronger, he deteriorated. His body was fragile, his mind clouded. By 30, Charles was physically broken. He drooled constantly, suffered from convulsions, and was plagued by hallucinations. His body swelled with fluid, his legs barely able to support his weight. He married twice, but both unions were childless, his body too weak to produce an heir. Historians have noted that the more inbred a monarch, the worse their kingdom fared. Under Charles II's rule, Spain crumbled, its economy collapsed, its military weakened, and its people suffered through famine and misery. Charles' death in 1700 marked not only the end of his reign, but the extinction of the Spanish Habsburg line. When doctors performed his autopsy, what they found was horrifying. His lungs were corroded, his intestines rotten, his body a decayed ruin. His remains told the story of a dynasty destroyed by its own traditions. But the Habsburgs weren't the only rulers who believed in the power of pure blood. Long before their time, another empire held an even more extreme belief in royal lineage, a belief so sacred, so absolute, that it shaped an entire civilization. The Egyptian pharaohs called it divine blood, but the price they paid for keeping it pure was written in their bones. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were more than rulers. They were living gods. Their bloodline wasn't just royal, it was divine. And to keep that lineage untainted, they did the unthinkable, marrying their own siblings, even their own children. For generations, Egyptian rulers took inbreeding to its extreme. Some of the most infamous figures in history followed this practice. Pharaoh Akhenaten, the radical who abandoned Egypt's traditional gods in favor of a single deity, married 2 of his own daughters, Meritaten and Ankhesenaten. His son, Tutankhamun, was the tragic result of this relentless cycle. DNA testing of his remains uncovered a series of devastating defects: a congenital leg deformity, a cleft palate, and chronic illness. The golden-masked boy king, once thought to be a powerful ruler, was so weak, he required a cane to walk. Even Akhenaten himself may have borne the scars of his bloodline's actions. Sculptures depict him with an elongated face, a bulging belly, and a frail frame, signs that some believe point to a genetic disorder linked to repeated inbreeding. He was not alone. Royal mummies have shown traces of rare conditions such as Froelich syndrome, which causes stunted growth, obesity, and infertility. Yet, despite the visible consequences, the cycle continued. In fact, it persisted for centuries, right up until the end of the dynasty. Even Cleopatra, Egypt's most famous queen, followed this tradition. At 18, she married her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XIII. Though their marriage didn't produce children, it cemented an age-old belief: outsiders were a threat. Keeping power meant keeping the bloodline within the family, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just Egypt's elite who believed in the power of pure blood. In some cases, ordinary Egyptians, even Persians, practiced endogamy, marrying within their own families to protect wealth, avoid costly dowries, and maintain social status. The consequences remained the same: disease, deformity, and a slow, inevitable decline. For centuries, Egypt's ruling class convinced themselves they were securing their future. Instead, they were destroying it, each generation weaker than the last, their bodies crumbling under the weight of their own lineage. But Egypt wasn't the last place where an obsession with blood purity had devastating consequences. Centuries later, in the remote mountains of Kentucky, another family's isolation and intermarriage would lead to something even more shocking: a family whose skin turned blue. Deep in the hills of eastern Kentucky, a family's strange secret ran through their blood. Their skin wasn't pale, nor olive, nor dark. It was blue. This eerie condition, known as methemoglobinemia, was the result of generations of intermarriage within an isolated Appalachian community. It all began in the early 1800s, when Martin Fugate, a French orphan, settled in the region and married Elizabeth Smith. Neither knew they carried a rare recessive gene. Of their 9 children, 4 were born with blue skin. With few outsiders in the remote mountainous region, the Fugates continued to marry within their own community, unintentionally preserving and passing on the mutation. Over time, the striking blue complexion became a haunting symbol of isolation and the unexpected consequences of a closed gene pool. For over a century, the Fugates' condition puzzled doctors and fueled local legends. Some whispered about a family cursed by the land. Others believed they were suffering from a supernatural affliction. But science told a different story: a dreadful combination of genetics, inbreeding, and the rarest twist of fate. Yet the Fugates were not the only bloodline to suffer the consequences of inherited disorders. Across the ocean, one royal dynasty paid an even greater price for keeping their bloodline pure. Queen Victoria of Great Britain unknowingly carried a genetic curse, hemophilia, a rare blood disorder that prevents clotting. But she wasn't the only one who suffered. Through arranged marriages, her descendants spread the disease through the courts of Britain, Germany, Spain, and, most fatefully, Russia. One of Victoria's granddaughters, Alexandra, inherited the gene. She fell deeply in love with Crown Prince Nicholas of Russia, but the Russian court disapproved. To them, she was an outsider, a foreigner, a threat. But Nicholas refused to let her go. Love won, and Alexandra became Empress of Russia. In 1904, she gave birth to their only son, Alexei Romanov, the heir to the Russian throne. But joy quickly turned to despair. Alexei was a hemophiliac. At the time, hemophilia was untreatable. A simple bruise could mean death. Alexandra worked hard to protect him, desperate for a cure. As his condition worsened, she turned to a mysterious Siberian monk named Rasputin. He claimed to have healing powers, and against all logic, Alexei improved whenever he was near. Whether it was hypnosis, suggestion, or sheer luck, Rasputin kept the boy alive and won Alexandra's unwavering devotion. But Rasputin was no savior. As his influence over the royal family grew, so did the fury of the Russian aristocracy. They saw him as a disease, rotting the empire from within. Desperate to remove him, nobles plotted his murder, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The empire was already crumbling, and in 1917, the Romanov dynasty finally fell. Hemophilia had become a silent assassin, weakening some of Europe's most powerful families. But why did certain bloodlines suffer more than others? What made some rulers strong, while others collapsed under the weight of their own genes? The answer lies in the science of inheritance, the hidden forces shaping history itself. Genes are the blueprint of life, controlling everything, from our eye color to the way our bodies function. These microscopic instructions are stored in DNA, a twisted, ladder-like molecule housed in nearly every cell. Each of us inherits one copy of every gene from our mother, and one from our father, a genetic combination that determines not just our physical traits, but also our susceptibility to disease. But sometimes genes mutate. These small errors can disrupt normal biological processes, leading to conditions like hemophilia, albinism, and Down syndrome. In some cases, mutations are random. In others, they're passed down through generations, concentrated through repeated intermarriage, as seen in history's most inbred families. Centuries before anyone understood DNA, a quiet Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel unknowingly laid the foundation of modern genetics. In the 1800s, Mendel's experiments with pea plants revealed predictable patterns in how traits were inherited. He discovered why children resemble their parents, why some traits skip generations, and why siblings can look so different. Later, British scientist Sir Ronald Fisher expanded on Mendel's work, introducing a way to measure how closely related two parents are. His formula, known as the coefficient of inbreeding, explained why children born to close relatives are far more likely to inherit genetic disorders. His research underscored a stark truth: genetic diversity is key to a population's survival. A chilling example of how isolation can alter genetics can be found in the remote island of Pingalap in Micronesia. In the 18th century, a devastating typhoon wiped out nearly the entire population, leaving only a handful of survivors. One of them unknowingly carried a rare mutation for achromatopsia, a condition that causes complete color blindness. As the tiny community intermarried over generations, the mutations spread. Today, about 10% of the island's residents can only see in shades of gray. As science advanced, so did our understanding of how to predict and prevent genetic disorders. In the mid-20th century, geneticist Sheldon Reed pioneered the concept of genetic counseling, giving families the ability to assess their risks before having children. His work changed the way we think about inheritance, offering a path to healthier future generations. But while science has given us a clearer picture of how genetics shape us, history has already written its lessons in blood. Across centuries, ruling families ignored the warnings, believing purity meant power. Instead, they sealed their own fate, crippled by the very bloodlines they tried to preserve, because in the end, nature always wins. We may now understand the science behind incest, but history has already shown us the consequences: generations shaped by choices made in the name of power, tradition, and control. If there's one lesson these stories teach us, it's this: no matter how much humans try to manipulate the natural order, nature always wins. What do you think? Have you heard of other cases of inbreeding with shocking consequences? Let us know in the comments. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. This is just one of the many nefarious events buried in history, and trust me, there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and remember to keep your eye on the past because history never forgets.